time, but here we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today, so let's get things started. A prince of peace, a president of peace. That is something that President Trump said that he wanted to be known for. Indeed, he campaigned in 2016, 2020, and 2024 as someone who would promote peace. And he is actively campaigning to be the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, now he wants to rebrand the Department of Defense as the Department of War. So I want to know what you think about that. Initially, when George Washington was president, it was founded as the Department of War, and that lasted until the Second World War. And then after that, well, we were in a different time. And so America decided to, well, we need to engage in deterrence because there's another superpower, the Soviet Union, that could also um, launch bombs that could destroy the planet, just like we can, just like we could, just like we're still able to do. And so maybe it was a time of deterrence. I don't know what we're dealing with right now, but I do know that Congress is the only entity that can actually rename the Department of Defense. But there's a spirit about that. So I said, let me go to David Swanson, Executive Director of World Beyond War. Of course, he's also an organizer with Roots Action. You've got to help me to understand what it is that we are looking at. And as we begin this conversation, I want you all to meet me on the Santita Jackson YouTube channel. Hey, meet Bernadette over there. Like and share. Help us with the algorithm, everybody. Like and share. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. And please meet me on Instagram, Santita Jackson IG, Santita Jackson IG. Facebook, Santita Jackson and Friends. That's the only place where I can accept new friends. Oh, so many of you continue to go to Santita Jackson. Please, Santita Jackson and Friends. And Blue Sky, santitajackson.bsky.social, santitajackson.bsky.social. And so let's begin this conversation because indeed, one of the leading advocates in the world today for peace is David Swanson. And so I bring you here to talk about war, a Department of War. I need you to help me to understand what it is. It's really not funny. I mean, because President Trump has had how many deferments for Vietnam? Five?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Many.
And
Uh,
one was for bone spurs. Bless his heart. Wow.
I mean, I'm in favor of anybody staying out of any war. They shouldn't do it cheating and lying and bad mouthing everybody else who isn't cheating and lying. But this is a guy like a broken clock, being right once a day. Maybe it's once every 4 years, but being right once a day for the completely wrong reasons, right? He wants to name the Department of Defense Department of War because he loves all the evil connotations of the word war. He loves the malice and the sadism and the cruelty and the destruction. He wants to glorify it. He's doing this while fueling incredibly horrific and dangerous wars in Ukraine and Gaza, and trying to start wars in Venezuela and Iran. And moments after this name change, threatening to let Chicago know what it means to be a Department of War. I'm actually getting hopeful that this fascist buffoon is going to stay the heck out of Chicago. But uh, this is what he wants, and he imagines this imaginary time in U.S. history, up until 1947, up until the Department of War was changed into the Department of Defense, this Orwellian name, while Orwell was writing his book. Uh, he imagines that up until then, the U.S. military won all its wars. They were all victories. And so by renaming it Department of War, he will magically be transported back to the golden age of, segregation and sexism and all the other things he loves, but of winning wars. Now, of course, these imperialistic wars, these wars, taking over the West from the indigenous people, taking over distant islands, killing the Filipinos by the millions. I mean, these were wars that, to the extent they were ever won, and I'm with Jeanette Rankin, you can no more win a war than you can win a hurricane. But to the extent that the U.S. was a victor in any of these things and got itself new land and new colonies, or the winner's trophy in World War II, it was either through massive genocidal slaughter of people, or it was through letting other people, in the case of World War II, unbeknownst to any viewers of any Hollywood movies, the Soviets doing most of the killing and dying, and the U.S. taking the credit. Much like the Ukrainians now doing most of the killing and dying, much like the incredible slaughter now in Gaza. But from 1947 up until a couple years ago, when we were told to accept a live streamed genocide in Palestine, uh, mass slaughter of innocents was generally considered unacceptable. So, Trump wants not just, genocidal wars and imperialist wars, but carpet bombing and nuclear bombings. He buys into the fantasy that the nuclear bombs won World War II. He wants those things to be acceptable under the name Department of War. Now, all of that being said, I want the thing called Department of War because it's a department that does war, that never did anything defensive, that was given a completely misleading propaganda name of defense so that people would like it better and fund it more, and think of it in better terms, lying to themselves, internalizing it so deeply that it's very, very hard to get a peace activist to stop saying the defense industry, the defense companies, the defense corporations, the Defense Department. And so now, by calling it the War Department, I like it, because language is not just how we communicate, but it's how we shape our thoughts. And if I have to talk about a War Department, I have to talk about a department that's dedicated to waging wars. And I have to look at, these past almost 80 years of wars that even the strongest advocates admit have all been disasters on their own terms, that have destroyed, killed millions of people, taken resources away that could have saved tens of millions of people, have destroyed the natural environment, have fueled bigotry and xenophobia, have prevented global cooperation, have stripped us of our civil rights and liberties. I mean, absolute disastrous, worst program ever. And we were all pretending it was defensive and humanitarian. No, call it Department of War. Put that hideous name on its front door. Make Congress pass National War Authorization Acts instead of National Defense Authorization Acts. Make it be honest. And my hope, because you don't have to accept nuclear bombs and genocides to call things by their proper names, to call things uh, as they are, as it was until 1947, when it was given this propaganda name. I went and looked at the other departments, and said, well, as long as we're using honest names, what would the other departments be? Well, the Department of Health and Human Services would be the Department of Lifespan Reduction. The Department of the Interior would be the Department of Extractivism. The Department of Housing and Urban Development would be the Department of the Rent's Too Damn Low. The Department of Homeland Security would be the Department of Fatherland Purity, and so forth. I mean, if you called things by what they actually are accurately, even if impolitely, you would have to think about what they are. You would have to stop and consider whether you should be supporting these things, whether we should be dumping $1 trillion a year into the War Department. That, best idea it's had in 80 years is to change its name. Hasn't done a single thing you can point to that's done a damn bit of good. Uh, and it's been the biggest expense and the biggest destroyer and the biggest corroder of our culture. And of course, Trump loves everything that's wrong with it, and he loves the honest name for it. But I in the end think we're better off being honest. Stop calling it, defense. Stop claiming it's a service. Stop, call it what it is: killing children.
Well, help me to understand this, because I think that you're framing this in a way that I've not really heard. You're saying, wait a minute, and particularly as you went down the list of the other departments in the cabinet, the other departments in our government, you said, wait a minute, let us call them, let us name them by what they do, not what we think that they are, but what they actually do. How would that, just given the military expenditures in our society and with the needs that we have in other areas of our society, for those expenditures to go to domestic spending, education, health, infrastructure, housing, all
Yeah.
that, right? How does, help us to understand at the end of the Second World War, how this rebrand helped to reshape our thinking?
Well, we went from a world where the United States didn't try to dominate the whole globe, where ordinary people didn't pay income taxes, where the government didn't invest in a permanent, massive military, industrial, congressional intelligence think tank complex, where Eisenhower hadn't had to warn yet about the military industrial complex, uh, where the government, because it wasn't this permanent giant war machine, was much cheaper and smaller and less ambitious, to a state of affairs where it was, normally taxes were raised for wars and then went away again, or three-quarters of the way went away again. And that never happened. That we just kept this massive taxing and spending, but not for useful things. I have nothing against taxing and spending. If you get something good for it, I'd love more of it. But for killing. And we went from the U.S. Military mostly being in the U.S. To having this array of military bases around the globe that has also never gone away, only been expanded in recent years. And the U.S. came to see itself during World War II as a global dominating force, and set up the United Nations to run the world, but with some of the animals a little more equal than others, to take another Orwell book. And people in the United States came to accept that the United States is special, that its wars are good, that laws apply to others, that things like the Nuremberg
Hmm.
rules against torturing patients without their consent, and so forth, apply to others. The US is above everybody else, and can not only set up the United Nations, but set up NATO to operate outside the United Nations,
Mhm.
as a war force to keep the other countries under the wings of the U.S. Eagle, and people came to accept to far too great an extent that our money and our energy and our academic system, was all going to be devoted to this industry of mass killing. Um, and it's, the top Nazis who survived were mostly imported into the U.S. military and not without effect, and the thinking of the United States became quite arrogant and quite expansive beyond what it had been
This
until
is
World War II.
this is after the Second World War. You were saying
During and
during.
after, yeah.
Okay, that we became much more, well, filled with hubris. Like, we are the superpower. Is that what happened?
Yeah. What do you do when there's a stalemate in a war in Ukraine and neither side is ever going to win, and you're going to have to compromise? You do not compromise. The rest of the world must compromise, right? And this is normal. This is completely acceptable in US discourse, right? Because we're the United States of goddamn America, and everybody else is, not worth that much. And so you never ever compromise. You just escalate. And so, you elect this buffoon who says he's going to make peace in one day and peace before he even moves into the White House and so forth. And he doesn't have the vaguest plan how to do it. He doesn't have the slightest notion how to do it other than to thump his chest and threaten and badger and try to bully his way to getting what he wants, which had no hope of working. It was like Richard Nixon's secret plan for peace, which is still secret. It's there's nothing there, uh, and yet that's apparently acceptable to a good number of U.S. voters, right?
But help me to understand, because he is not stopping outside of the world. He's looking at the military, the U.S. military, and he's thinking about waging war in the United States.
I know. He said he used the term war, Department of War, in reference to Chicago, and then had to take it back. And I didn't really mean that. But he's sending armed military troops into U.S. cities, into L.A. and Washington and elsewhere, and threatening to send them all over. And this is, because he wants personal power, and he sees the military as something he can command as commander in chief. Whereas we got enough problems dealing with armed police who are often armed by the military with the weapons they don't want anymore so they can get new ones. That's bad enough, but they aren't directly under the command of Donald Trump, thank goodness. And so he's pretending that he's addressing a crime epidemic when crime is at, a 30-year low.
Mhm.
And he's using this excuse to send in armed troops without really having any idea what they're going to do, because they aren't really going to deal with crime. Uh, they're going to be a show of force. They're going to be intimidating. They're going to be threatening, and they're going to be helping him intimidate and kidnap and disappear people who have the wrong papers in their pockets or who look the wrong way. And ICE has just been given new permission in LA to target everybody based on what they look like. And this is what Trump wants. He wants to be able to scare anybody, bully anybody into getting what he thinks he wants. And that dictators always love militaries. Dictators don't go in for legislatures or civic forums or sports teams or militaries. That's what they want.
To what end uh, is he planning to take this? He feels that might makes right, not right makes might, which kind of flies in the face of him trying to secure this Nobel Peace Prize. It there are there contradictions that we're looking at, or what help me to understand this, because he campaigned, David Swanson, executive director of World Beyond War. Whew. He's campaigning, actively campaigning. He's not telegraphing, he is saying, I want a Nobel Peace Prize. At
Yeah.
the same time, I'm going to rebrand the Department of Defense the Department of War, because that's when we were winning wars. And he does not see this as being contradictory at all. Is it?
Well, in the Pentagon, they have a peace pole, a monument to peace that says, let there be peace on earth on every side, that the sort of thing that peace activists put up in their town squares. Because in the Pentagon, there's a widespread belief, or at least pretense, that the way you get peace is by preparing for war, or in the ancient Roman saying, or the way you get peace is by waging wars. And this surely is what Donald Trump believes. He believes that if you threaten everyone enough and destroy everyone enough, you'll have peace. You may have devastation and call it peace in another Roman saying, or you may have fear and submission and call that peace. Of course, he's wrong. Of course, it doesn't work, and of course, he didn't make peace anywhere on it by his inauguration day or ever since. But I think this is what he believes, and why he doesn't see it as a contradiction, and why a local school board member here in Virginia said that he'd be happy to support celebrating the International Day of Peace as long as nobody got the idea he was against any wars. And it's because war, if you're deep enough in the propaganda where you really believe the stuff, war is a way to get to peace. And
Is it?
all
But is it?
the
Is it
is it a
really?
way to get to peace? No, of course not. It's a way to get to war. The way you want peace, prepare for peace. If you want war, prepare for war. But it's a widespread belief to various degrees. And it wasn't just the US government in 47 that renamed the War Department the Defense Department, but all the little sidekicks and followers and vassal states and NATO members did it too. There's defense departments all across the globe, and they believe this stuff. And so not only will the Democrats in Congress and every professor in every U.S. university, except maybe the National Defense University, which is now getting renamed, not only will they refuse to accept this name change, but they will uphold the idea of the Defense Department as a proper name for such an institution. And the Nobel Peace Prize, committee, I think sees things the same way. I mean, people say irony died when they gave it to Kissinger, right? But there's always worse. There's always another step, and they gave it to Obama. They gave it to the European Union. Half the time they give it to actual wagers of war, some of the biggest wagers of war in the world, and half the time they give it to completely irrelevant stuff. People who work for schools or green energy or women's rights, all kinds of wonderful things that aren't abolishing war. And yet, rarely have they given it to some clownish loudmouth who's openly campaigning to get it. Some people are quietly campaigning to get it, trying to do things to earn it. But telling their friends they hope they get it, but publicly saying you should have it, I don't know of any case where that's worked. And the Nobel Committee sees war as a proper, civilized, defensive, humanitarian, philanthropic enterprise. This is how everybody's been conditioned to think of war. This is how we've come to accept dumping trillions of dollars into this madness. And So, yeah, of course, he shoots himself in the foot by calling it the Department of War when he's trying to get a peace prize. But he also throws a monkey wrench into the gears of the worldwide war machine that likes to think of itself as, as so good and noble and only killing the proper people in the proper way when they deserve it, and it's necessary and last resort and in proportion, and civilians are being spared, and all of this stuff that doesn't describe a single war we've seen in centuries. um so anyway, he's not going to get the Nobel Peace Prize, as he shouldn't. uh and I hope he's not going to establish a militarized dictatorship, and, abandon all vestiges of representative government in this country, too. But I can't be so sure on that one.
But isn't it? But doesn't it appear that that's what he's doing? Because he literally, as he announces that he wants to rebrand the Department of Defense, the Department of War, that he wants to deploy this newly rebranded department on America's streets. How
Yeah.
is that supposed to work? I mean, and just I mean, and what I mean, what then? Just how does that work, and what then? How does that reshape well Americans? I mean, does that frighten Americans? Does that make them push back? I mean, here in Chicago, people are many people are very angry about this proposed deployment. There's some people who welcome it, though, to be fair. Some people do. But others have seen the progress that Mayor Johnson has made by employing what they call wraparound services, doing the best that he could do, excuse me, with these budget shortfalls, and really having a more of a progressive approach.
Yeah.
And so we have seen the crime rates go down. And yet, the president is determined not only to do this to deploy troops in Chicago on the streets amongst the people, but he wants to do it in Baltimore, Los Angeles again. I mean, just all over the country. But the Pentagon has the memo that said, wait a minute, they are going to be used to quell civil unrest. So let's get to that. You know,
It,
how would that
the,
work?
I think they should invade Chicago with 1% of the military budget. They should send Chicago a check for 1%, which is, $10 billion, right? I mean, take that and put it to good use. It will do a world of good. Whereas, what good are the soldiers going to do? And, from the experience we've seen thus far in Washington and elsewhere, many of these soldiers are not very happy about it themselves, and
Ah,
may not be following these orders forever.
oh, wait a minute, because you bring up a point before we get back to this. What about these soldiers? Because the National Guard, they're your neighbors, but so are the soldiers.
Well,
What I mean, has he factored in? Have we factored in that some of these soldiers might be put off by being deployed into America's neighborhoods?
yeah, yeah. Well, they are, and even if you use the Texas National Guard in Chicago, that the country's not that divided. There are
Mhm.
people in Texas with family in Chicago, and vice versa. I think it's a real weakness in this whole plan, and it's a reason why, when the troops show up, not to necessarily scream at them and call them foreigners or bad names or fascists get out or throw sandwiches at them, funny as that may be to everyone, but to say, brother and sister, you shouldn't be doing this. This is your home too. We are all together. Put your guns down. Don't follow illegal orders.
Mm.
This could come back to bite you. There's a better way. And people are doing this to some extent, and it's got to work. My hope when Trump tried a coup in Washington some years ago now was that people would say how horrible, how awful. Oh, and there's a couple hundred of these the US has been doing in other people's capital cities around the world. Those have been horrible too. And so my hope now is when everybody's angry about troops coming into our cities, that they get angry about blowing up a Venezuelan ship, that they get angry about blowing up people standing in a square in the Middle East, that they start to see the problem, uh, because there's going to be a lie about why Chicago deserves it, but there's a lie about why Venezuelans in a boat deserve it, right? But
Mhm.
none of that makes it legal. None of it makes it moral. None of it should make it acceptable to us. And you can't have a Department of Defense and then go, make some accusation against some guys in a ship and blow them up, because it's not defending anyone from anything. It's committing mass murder. But that the same has been true for 80 years. It's never made the slightest bit of sense. And so, you know, eh, again, I like the honesty, but I don't like anything that's coming with it. And we've got to say no to, we've got to engage with all these groups that are doing so much wonderful creative resistance, and calling the local police on ice, and alerting neighbors, and monitoring their own neighborhoods.
Well, you organize with Roots Action. How how would you recommend that people organize, or or non-violently resist? I mean, what would you recommend that people do? Because more and more people are marching. People want to do. They are resisting. They want to do something, um, but they're also being cautioned by others that, look, don't video you. Don't you have someone with you? Don't go by yourself. Because in Chicago we have a place called Home and Square, which was modeled on CIA black sites. So people would get disappeared there. That's the kind of town Chicago is. Um, what do you recommend that people do?
Well, you do have to be careful, and it does depend on who you are and what your situation is. But people in cities across the country are managing to link up with others, to communicate in relatively secure means, using, apps like Signal, and monitoring where ICE is going to show up, and monitoring the homes of people who are targets, and alerting neighborhoods, and turning out in large numbers with cameras. Cameras are good and numbers are good. And chasing ICE out of their neighborhoods. I think loud, noisy protests and big marches like they had in Washington, D.C. A couple of days ago are very good for organizing people and building up people's spirits and getting information out. But we also need to be blocking the streets and protecting the neighborhoods, and providing sanctuary, while at the same time allies are working in the courts and the legal means, to push back against this madness, which is having some success. uh, I think that, it depends where you are. There are different organizations doing great work, but you should talk to the National Lawyers Guild, and talk to the ACLU, and talk to all the groups that are putting out flyers and videos about how to know your rights and what you have a right to do and what you don't. But this is a wonderful lesson that immigrants in particular can advise their non-immigrant friends on how to do, because other countries are very good at this, at mass nonviolent resistance to militarism.
How should Americans take this at this time? I mean, there is the expectation that there will be social unrest when these cuts, when the $1 trillion healthcare cuts hit, when the WIC cuts hit, when the SNAP cuts hit, as more and more people get pushed out of the workforce. 300,000 plus Black women lost their jobs since February because Black people have gotten our opportunities for advancement after we've gone to school, acquired these degrees, et cetera, et cetera. You've been able to go to the government. And now that door is being closed. It's been slammed shut. White women got more jobs, more than 100,000 jobs. They saw an increase. Hispanic women saw a 100,000 plus increase. White men, 350,000 plus jobs they were able to get. I'm just wondering how long that's going to last, Stephen, because for most Americans, the rent is too high.
Oh, yeah. It's
Not,
much too high and going higher.
it's going higher, and people feel, I see an increasing sense of despair. That they just had two women, well, several women who have videos that have gone viral. They were white women, middle-aged women. You could not quite tell their age, David, because you could see that poverty. They had been living in want, and poverty ages you. It does.
Sure.
And they were showing people how to live on $1 a day. This is where we are in America right now. And it is in that context. And these are the people who send their kids to the Department of War because that's the way out for them, right? But is that the way this is supposed to be, David?
Well, the poverty draft is a real tool of the War Department. I don't have to say that other name anymore. And I think it's potentially a very good prediction that there's going to be unrest. It depends what that means, right? Because if unrest means giving Trump the footage of violence in the city streets that he longs for, that he's sort of already retroactively using as the justification for having gone in and created it, right? Then it's not good news. But if unrest means people somehow, despite all the suffering and struggling and not having food to eat that day, are able to organize and take part in nonviolent resistance, including educating people about these things, as shows like this do, which impacts the polling, which is telling Trump right now that the majority of the United States is against him using the National Guard like this. If people can find it in themselves to get organized and into the streets and bang pots and pans and put up signs and block off neighborhoods and protect people in churches and advocate for steps from local governments and state governments to undo this madness, then it's a very, very good thing, because our worst problem is too many people sitting in chairs and sofas and not doing anything.
Is using ICE a pretext? Because they're deploying ICE, the FBI, and the National Guard, and they're federalizing the police. This is a lot of policing, is it not?
It's a ton. I think we should abolish the whole thing, but
Of course,
we're so many steps.
help me to understand the justification for it. Because I said, wait a minute. DC is not a murder capital. Chicago is not either. They're skipping over Memphis. They've got a Democratic mayor, but it's a red state. I'm just, what is going on here?
Well, it's not about making us safe from crime. That's not what it's about. It's about blaming others. If we weren't blaming the illegal immigrants, as they're called, or the Black people, or the women, or the gay people, or if we weren't blaming a dozen different groups that Trump wants us to blame for the way some things are going in our lives, we might be blaming the billionaires. We might
Mm.
be blaming the politicians. We might be blaming the people actually responsible. And so what do you do if you're a billionaire or you want to be a billionaire and you serve the needs of billionaires and you want political power? You can't run in a completely corrupt system on the idea that you're going to clean things up and tax the rich and help the poor and move to a slightly more equitable place. uh, you've got you've got to say, elect me and I'll fix all your problems by kicking out the Mexican immigrants, right? And this was the core of Trump's campaign. And unlike most presidents of both parties, he's actually keeping some promises. They're horrendously awful promises. I don't want him keeping these promises, but he's keeping them. And he's targeting immigrants, and he's targeting immigrants who are here without the proper papers, which I couldn't care less about. I don't think borders are sensible things, but uh this is what he thinks, and this is what his supporters think. uh and you had hundreds of people arrested at a auto factory in Georgia, and somebody asked Trump about it, and he said, "Oh, well, they were illegal. Got to arrest them." And you can just picture the cheers from his suffering, struggling fans and supporters whose lives are still crap, but who think that everything's going to magically get better because Trump is taking it out on the immigrants. You know, it's absolutely ridiculous. There's nothing factual or rational about it. People who immigrate here make themselves richer. They make their loved ones back in some other part of the world richer, and they make you and me richer. This is how it actually works. Uh, but Trump needs someone to blame. He needs a scapegoat, and that's what he's doing.
Well, he is doing that. And how should we be thinking at this time? I mean, just as we're watching this rebrand, because it's something that the executive order that he signed last week enables him to do yet another workaround Congress, because only Congress has the power to rename. Not just he's not renaming, he's rebranding, right?
Yeah.
So Secretary Hegseth can be known secondarily as the Secretary of War. I mean, it's really slick. I'm just, and he still has a lot of support for all of the things that he's doing that I question, that you question. He still has. Well, he's lost some support. He hasn't lost all of it. I mean, there's some people who agree with him. There's some people who agree with him that they should come to Chicago, ICE, FBI, National Guard, federalized police. I mean, some people are saying that, really. So I'm wondering, is it are Americans that fond of war,
Well, I
or I
think
mean, what is it? What do you think?
I think we have a good majority against war, for peace, for moving military spending to peaceful spending. I don't think we're like the general population of Israel cheering for the genocide. I think we're very far from that. I think Trump in the polls is very, very unpopular. Of course, there are some people who love him, but and those people include most people in positions of power. So he goes to the US Open tennis tournament, and the TV networks don't air the footage of him being booed. But anywhere he goes, he gets booed because he's not popular. And it takes time for people who believe in fantasies to snap out of it. But it's not hard to realize that what's really bothering you is the rent and the food bill and the medical bills and the college bills. And when you realize that, uh, you're gonna eventually have to ask yourself, why is everything getting worse for me when Trump is taking all these dramatic steps to punish all the people responsible, all the black and Latino people who have caused me all this trouble. They've been punished, and nothing's gotten better. I mean, it takes time, but some people start to see that, and Trump is out of control and pushing every law he can break and every law he can bend. He's doing it. Um, but
But
if Congress wanted to stop him, they could this minute.
I'm trying to see the connection between, because it seems that the presidency and how it's structured. One person cannot just come in and be the swashbuckler and do what they want to do. That does not work that way. Kennedy tried to do that, and he met an unfortunate end. And he was trying to make a lot of changes, and it's not funny. It's a rueful laugh, but we talked about this before, David Swanson. Um, I look at the Peter Thiels, and I look at the Elon Musks and the Alex Karps and all of these people, um, who have instituted a technocracy, right? Who are saying that what Peter Thiel wrote, what did he say? That he did not believe that freedom and democracy are compatible. And this is someone who put J.D. Vance on the ticket, someone who is really in line to become president. Freedom and democracy not compatible. I mean, you've got this man who went in and hacksawed the federal government. That is Elon Musk. He makes $8 million a day off the federal government. He's in
Yeah.
line now to become a trillionaire off of the federal government. What is happening here? I mean, and you have a president, I think, who is aiding and abetting an agenda of theirs to institute authoritarianism and to institute a police state and to force Americans to accept whatever is put before us or rammed down our throats. Is am I missing something? Because I'm trying to connect these dots.
I,
Because the
I,
people behind the people who are behind him really unsettle me.
yeah, yeah. I hope the saving grace in this mad idiocracy, in which Trump's supporters don't want to care about the millions of people who are suffering, don't want to care about the natural environment, don't want to care about the wars or the danger of nuclear war, that they're obsessed with Epstein. And they're the very same people who bow at Trump's feet, who are demanding the exposure of, exactly what's going to make them hate Trump, right? I mean, uh, that won't happen easily, but yeah, you'd like to think I was, looking for hope in the so-called opposition party in Washington, or in where I do see some hope in uprising of ordinary people. But the opposition party in Washington isn't much opposition.
But
They
you have to let them go. I mean, we see in New York, we see in Minneapolis, two young men who would dare to run as Democratic Socialists, and the American people said, "That's who we want."
yeah.
And the opposition party is saying, "I don't know, no, we don't know if they cannot even say their names."
No, no.
you know,
These are the people who preferred Trump to Bernie, right? They
yeah.
they they really, really don't want someone who's going to do a world of good for people. They'd prefer Donald Trump, and much as they love to hate Donald Trump, they don't want their billionaire party taken over by socialists, and so they hate the name
So
change. Don't call it.
wait. So you're saying to me you think the Democrats would prefer to have Donald Trump rather than have Democratic socialists be their standard bearers?
Even halfway to Democratic Socialists, even Bernie Sanders,
Uh-huh.
they clearly, and by they I mean Barack Obama and everybody who's ever
Hmm.
worked with Barack Obama, uh, preferred Donald Trump to Bernie Sanders. And you can say that because Bernie was leading in polls
Yes, he
against
was.
Trump, and
And they all
they
pushed.
didn't want that. You look at Mamdani in New York, very, very popular, potential to lead a transformation and victory upon victory for Democratic candidates if they just follow his lead. Uh, no,
And
they
Fateh in
don't want that.
Minneapolis, and Fateh in Minneapolis. These are
Yes,
two young men
yes.
who are already holding elective office, who have run. Well, they said, okay, I'll run in the Democratic primary. That's why I have the space, but I'm a Democratic socialist, and that is where I stand. And
They took it away in a
they're
back
trying
room.
to, but fortunately, they're going to press. They're going to put their case before the people, and I hope that the people respond affirmatively to them, because they're speaking to things that we need, which would also, in these last few minutes here, help me to. It gives me hope about. I'm glad that I've spoken with you, because you said, wait a minute, the Department of War, that is really apt. What- Let's stop candy coating this thing here. It is the
Well,
Department of War.
But look at who's upset about that name. It includes the people putting $1 trillion a year into it. It includes the people not stopping the weapons to Ukraine or Israel or anywhere else. It includes the DNC that recently met in Minneapolis and voted against a resolution to support an arms embargo on Israel, voted for arming a genocide, because there are 8% of Democrats who share their position. The other 92% be damned. So when it's more important to arm a genocide than to listen to 92% of the people who can, still say they're on your side and respect themselves in the morning, you got problems. You're clearly, victory is not the top of the agenda.
Mm.
You would rather be loyal to the warmongers and lose than be for peace. And so, yeah, they're very, very upset about the name change. But I want them to be upset about the thing. And the name names the thing.
Just what should we be looking at this tremendous time of change? I mean, this is an executive order. Clearly, he did not put this to a vote. Um, but he did take us back to George Washington, what, 236 years ago, 1789, when he started the Department of War, which held until the Second World War. And I think of Dennis Kucinich, Congressman Kucinich, who, when he would talk about establishing a Department of Peace when he was running for president, people would laugh in the audience.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
And you have to have peace talks if you're going to end war. I do believe that there can be a world beyond war. How do we get there? What needs to change in our thinking and in our actions, David Swanson?
We need to prioritize human survival over kicking our designated enemy. Doing something mean to Venezuela or Russia is not more important than human survival. We need to get rid of the nuclear weapons that we are in ever greater danger of seeing used. This is part of the idea of the Department of War, is that you're going to have wars and use whatever weapons you like, including the ones with the great potential to destroy the world. We need to go to the United Nations and say we have certain countries out of control. One of those countries has the power of the veto in the Security Council, and it's time for the General Assembly to go around the Security Council and to take action on what's needed in Gaza immediately, or we're going to normalize live streamed genocide. And we need the governments of the world through the UN to commit to arresting Israeli war criminals who have arrest warrants out against them, to establish an arms embargo on weapons and parts of weapons to and from Israel and to and from any country that's arming Israel, cut off diplomatic relations with Israel, end financial transactions, trade, travel to and from Israel, train and send, as people are doing with a flotilla now, unarmed civilian defense teams, as well as food and medicine and doctors and aid workers and so forth. I mean, dozens of important, useful steps that can be taken that have been barely started. And don't panic. Don't get desperate. Don't give up and say, let's send a military. Let's demand that countries send their militaries to fight Israel and the United States to save Gaza. Uh, you know, I mean, it's crazy. It's not going to happen. We're trying to get them to stop arming Israel, or nowhere near getting them to go and fight against their own weapons in Israel. But it's madness to think that militarism is going to save us from militarism. We have to understand that we can live better without it.
Is there anything that's been left unsaid today as we look at this? As we look at this Department of War, it's a colloquialism, but that is going to be, according to executive order, at least that it will be a title that the Secretary of Defense, the head of the Pentagon, will be able to use.
I guess I prefer Secretary of War as something to call a guy who is, constantly crowing about the glories of warrior culture and the need to go out and use mass violence and kill people and make the world suffer and listen, and who is part of a global war machine, the key part of keeping these wars going, keeping these war alliances like NATO going, keeping these military bases operating around the globe, and threatening and risking ever greater wars. Is now in Puerto Rico, apparently working on plans for a war on Venezuela, which is, a crime. It's the highest crime on the books to go and attack a country, or to go and attack ships that are from a country. This is not an act of defense. It's not even a legal act of war for people who imagine there is such a thing. It's a blatant crime, which is what war is. And I think I think it's fine to call him Secretary of War. There's other things I like to call him I can't say on the air, but but you got to stop him doing what he's doing.
But I think you make the point. Call the thing what it is. It is war, and that is what we make. Because many Americans we believe that we wage peace, and we don't. We wage war all over the world and within our own borders, and we're beginning to see that. So, David Swanson, Executive Director of Worlds Beyond War. Of course, you're also with Roots Action, all my dear friends over there. Norman Solomon and Jeff Cohen and Sam Rosenthal and India Walton and so many wonderful people. Waging peace. That is what you're doing, waging peace. And maybe that's what we need to do. Dr. King tried to tell us that. He said, where do we go from here, chaos or community? And that's right. It is truly the Department of War. I guess George Washington and Donald Trump, dare I say their names in the same sentence, but they have a point.
One was the country's richest man and one of its biggest slave owners, and the other one would like to be.
Well, and that was David Swanson wrapping it up for us. World Beyond War, everybody, give them your support and, of course, Roots Action. And as we make our voices, we lift our voices. Remember, nonviolent resistance is the way. Nonviolent resistance. If you want to end war, people have to drop their weapons and they have to sign a peace treaty, really. So why don't we just do the shortcut, David Swanson? What did John Lennon say? All I'm saying is
Give peace a chance, and war is over.
war is over. That's the Christmas song.
Yeah.
Hallelujah. Santita Jackson and David Swanson here on the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. God bless. David